I'm Bridget Indelicato from Mindful Gardening and the Innisfil Seed Library, and welcome to Harvesting and Seed Saving. This webinar is the final installment of a 5-part series, Get Out and Grow, in partnership with the Rizzardo Health Wellness Centre. And today is the first day of fall. So it's a perfect time to talk about the basics of seed saving and extending your harvest for some plants and even some late season planting, if you can believe it. A reminder, we are recording tonight's webinar, so you may want to keep your cameras off. And after my presentation, I'd be happy to take up any questions that you have about the presentation or other vegetable gardening questions in general. You can simply type your questions into the chat box at any time, and we'll take them up at the end. So welcome. So a few things to consider right now. So extending the harvest. That's how you can extend your harvest for some of the plants that are in your garden right now. For example, your tomato plants, or what you can sow during the cooler months of fall. And seed saving will be covering sort of 3 main categories. So seeds that you're saving off of living plants, seeds inside fruiting plants, and seeds on biennial plants. So I'll be going into detail about what all of those terms mean. So extending the harvest. We'll look at ways to get more harvest from your plants that are in your garden. As I mentioned, your tomatoes. You probably have green tomatoes on your plants right now. The weather's starting to turn. And that first frost date, which is typically around October 1st for Innisfil and berry, is kind of around the corner. So you're probably wondering, how am I going to eat these tomatoes? How am I going to ripen them? What can I do? So we'll be talking about extending your harvest in that regards. And also types of plants that you can still grow. You can still direct sow them in the cooler months, and how to stretch their harvest. So how do you keep those growing even when there's a bit of snow? So there's some tricks and tips there that we'll be talking about. So essentially, we're looking at ripening, sowing, and protecting. Those are sort of 3 terms that we can kind of look at right now. So ripening late tomatoes, that's something that I think a lot of us are kind of worried about, struggling with. So as I said, we approach that first frost date in early October. Usually a hard frost comes a little later, but we might get a touch of light frost around the 1st of October. And that can, hurt some of these heat-loving plants. So you'll likely have some of those green tomatoes hanging on your plants. So there are a few ways to ripen them when they're still in the ground. You can prune, and you really should prune, all of the new shoots that are coming up. So you'll see, especially these are the indeterminate varieties. So they're the varieties that are vining, and they just keep growing all season long, providing lots of tomatoes for you. So if you're seeing new shoots, especially shoots with flowers, we don't want the plant to put its energy into producing more flowers and new fruit. We want all that energy to go into the existing fruit. So you'll want to prune off with clean, sharp scissors or pruners. Snip off all that new growth that's coming up. You essentially just want to leave enough leaves for photosynthesis to occur to keep that plant alive. So really the leaves that are around the fruit that already exists. So if you have a nice cluster of tomatoes that are green, just have the leaves around that part of the plant. So my plants look pretty sad right now. There's hardly any leaves, mostly vines. I also take the leaves from underneath the plant. So again, you're getting more airflow. More sunlight is getting in to ripen, because the sun will help to ripen your tomatoes. So the more sun and airflow you can get into your tomato plants, the better. And it's also very wet right now. So you don't want disease to be introduced with the wet weather and lots of leaves that we don't really need. So that's one really good way. So prune away all those excess leaves. Leave the leaves that are, just sort of underneath those green tomatoes, and that should give you some extra time right now. But as we move into colder weather, and you've got the frost date, so let's say we're just before the beginning of October, you're probably going to want to pick those, because what will happen is with changing fluctuating temperatures and fluctuating moisture, you'll probably start seeing cracking and all sorts of things. And then once the plant gets hit by a hard frost, it will no longer provide energy for those tomatoes and will essentially hurt the plant. So you can pick those green tomatoes. You can even do this now. Pick the green tomatoes, put them in a single layer in a cardboard box, and a sheet of newspaper over top. Put it in a dark spot, just indoors, like in your kitchen, in a cupboard, sort of out of sight, definitely out of direct sunlight, and they will ripen under that newspaper in that cardboard. Gives them the ability to sort of have their chemicals do their thing under that newspaper while still being breathable. So that's one way to ripen. You'll also want to check often, make sure that none are rotting in there, because sometimes you will get some that will get a little squishy and then it can affect its neighbors under that newspaper. And also check to see if they're ripened. And then, you can kind of go from there. And of course, you've probably heard of fried green tomatoes. So if you do like that flavoring, that sort of extra sourness, by all means, you can pick those green tomatoes and prepare them. Fried green tomatoes, you can make sort of salsas and chutneys, that kind of thing, with green tomatoes. Are quite tasty. Last year, that's what I did with my cherry tomatoes, because they're kind of too small to bread and fry. So I, whipped them up as a nice salsa, sort of in place of a tomatilla. Kind of has that same flavor. And I also use my homegrown garlic, so I had a nice way to use up my green tomatoes. If all else fails, you can always put them in the compost if you feel you've got enough tomatoes from the season. But there really are ways to extend that season. It's not all lost if the frost comes. And you can plant and protect some of your cool-loving plants. So perhaps you've planted some lettuce or spinach, arugula, all those plants that really like the cooler weather, the plants that you probably planted in spring. If you planted those again this fall, so a couple of weeks ago, and if we have frost coming in the forecast, some plants like spinach are okay with a touch of frost. They actually get a little sweeter when they've got the frost. But you might want to start thinking about row covers. So row covers are a thin white material that you can buy in a roll. Best if you have sort of a hoop over top so that the fabric's not touching your plants. That way it is protecting it from any frost landing on it. So that's one way to do it. You can extend the season even further with a more sort of rigid structure. So you can have a box with a lid with sort of a window on top. And there's different ways to do that. Even when there's snow on the ground, you can be picking lettuce. You can be picking lettuce in December with this strategy. And one of the tricks with that is you're allowing some airflow by opening up the little door during the sunny parts of the winter days. But again, you can find resources online on how to do winter sowing with covers. If you're so inclined and don't want to take a break just yet from gardening, you can definitely extend those cool loving. But of course, your tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, all those warm, long maturing plants just won't survive being under protection even. You might get away with a little protection in the early parts before frost hits by covering your tomato plants with sheets or row cover. But really, once that hard frost hits, the plant will suffer and it just won't survive. And you can also direct sow still. So radishes do really well. They're sort of a quick root that you can grow. And they actually like the cool weather. So again, think about what you might have grown in the spring that will do well now in the fall. And then planting things that are sort of at their immature stage. So they're sort of baby leaf stage. So you can grow spinach, leaf lettuce, Swiss chard, kale, mustard greens, packer, bok choy, arugula, mesclun mix. All of these plants grow really quickly. You can eat their leaves pretty much at any stage because they're quite young and delicious and, mostly for salads and that kind of thing. And again, you can extend that season by covering them with row cover when it gets really cool out. But again, there's still lots you can grow and enjoy into fall. Of course, planting garlic. I think I've mentioned this in my other webinars because it is such an important and wonderful thing to do. It's one of my greatest joys, quite honestly, is growing garlic. Fall is the time to do that because it takes roughly 9 months for the garlic to grow underground and be ready to harvest next summer. So I usually plant mine in mid-October. So anytime between, again, that frosty date and even into November. So if you've got a busy schedule, as long as the ground isn't frozen, you can get those garlic bulbs in. The trick is to get them in before the ground freezes so that the roots can start to establish. That needs to happen before winter hits or they won't survive underground. So this is usually something I do Thanksgiving weekend. So it's kind of perfect timing around the 14th, 15th of October. And it's usually beautiful weather too. So it's fun to do. Again, there's work sort of at the beginning when you're planting them, but then you've got that nice stretch of time, aside from snipping scapes, which you may know or have heard of. That is essentially snipping off what would become the flower and seeds on the top of the plant. Snipping that off will redirect the energy into the bulb and usually give it another few weeks. And you're typically in Innisfil berry, you're harvesting in July and August. And then if you're really keen on growing garlic, you can grow more garlic so that you have what you'd call seed garlic to grow in that same fall. So if you grew garlic this year, you pick your biggest, best looking bulbs, and those cloves will give you nice big bulbs for next year. So you can plant them this fall. And the key really to growing garlic successfully is having a really nice sunny location. So pick the sunniest spot in the summertime, because right now you'll see the sun is sort of lower, so you might have shady areas, but in the sort of heat of summer, think about where the sun hits your yard the best. You'll want to amend that soil. So if it's already a vegetable garden, you just amend that soil because you've probably grown other things there and you've depleted it. And garlic loves rich organic soil. So add compost, manure. Those are two great things you can buy commercially. Or if you're really keen and you've composted your plant material over the years, you've probably got some black gold, as they call it. So you can add that to the bed and you're good to go. And again, you're going to want good quality cloves, preferably local and preferably organic. That way, you know they'll grow well in our growing conditions because they're local. And being organic, you know that you're not fighting any pesticides or herbicides that might be lurking in those bulbs. And you'll have sort of the healthiest local garlic and hopefully the most successful growing for you. So just a sort of snapshot on how you plant garlic. Again, if you don't have your own that you've harvested, buy organic or locally grown. You can try farmers markets. A lot of the garlic growers are sort of depleted their stock for the year. You'll usually see they're selling them usually in August. So their garlic has probably been harvested in July and August. They've dried them. That's another process you need to do to store them. So usually by August, September, they're selling them. And I know some of the suppliers I know about are sort of sold out, but you can hopefully find some, like I said, at farmers markets, or even if you're taking a drive on a country road in the fall, checking out leaves, the changing leaves, you might see some signs that say seed or garlic for sale. And essentially seed garlic is big bulbs. So it's not really special in any way other than they're a good size cloves, which will give you big garlic. That's kind of the trick to that. And then you'll just want to separate those cloves from the bulb, keeping that paper on. You don't want to remove the paper because it'll essentially rot underground. It needs that papery covering as a protection. So think about that. If you accidentally rip one, you're going to be eating that tonight or this week, that kind of thing. So you don't want to put that in the ground. It won't survive for you. And like all bulbs, you're planting the tip up. So if you think about the bottom of the bulb, that's where the root system is. So you want that tip up, reaching the sky, and that's the direction it's going to grow. And you're going to do them 4 inches deep and 6 inches apart. So that gives you a good depth for that bulb to develop and the good width for it to develop also between each other, so that when it comes time to harvest, you're not accidentally stabbing your beautiful garlic bulbs underground. So it gives it lots of room to grow for them to mature and also for you to successfully harvest them without injuring them. And what I like to do as well is cover the whole area that I have planted with a nice thick layer of straw. And right now, of course, you're going to find straw. It's, Halloween, Thanksgiving season. So you're going to find big straw bales at your local garden centers. Some farms will have it. So get your hands on some as soon as you can, preferably without seeds in them. I know sometimes that's hard to do. But you might think that they will sprout. Those seeds will sprout once you've laid it down and water comes into contact with them. Not the end of the world. You can always just weed those out. But a nice thick layer of straw will protect it over the winter. It'll insulate. And then into the summer season, it kind of keeps that soil a consistent temperature, keeps it consistently moist. I've never had to water my garlic intentionally. It just keeps the soil perfectly temperate, and moist. So it's there right through until harvest. So you've got that thick layer of straw on there for about 9 months. Some people use leaves when they're raking them up in the fall, which is a good source of nitrogen for your soil. But of course, the worms and other creatures and microbes are going to eat away at that. So by the time next July rolls around, you probably won't have that bed of mulch. So I just find straw is going to stay put pretty much right through. It doesn't break down very easily. So it'll be on there for you. Rain will get through it nicely. It stays fairly fluffy. And again, you're keeping weeds down. So it's just an all around great thing to apply to your garlic bed. If you want to learn more about how to do that, on my YouTube channel, Mindful Gardening, which you'll find on the mindfulgardening.ca website, there's a whole series from planting to harvesting to drying. So of course, harvesting them, like when you do that, how you do it, and drying it is important for storage. So if you want to be able to store your garlic for up to 8 months and still be eating them, after Christmas, you'll want to find out how to do that properly. And it's quite simple. It's just, again, knowing how to do it, knowing where to put them and how to store them safely. So I really do recommend you check that out to see how to plant, harvest, and dry those. So saving seeds on living plants. Essentially, it's probably the easiest method because you're simply letting them be. You're just leaving them on the living plant to dry. So it just really takes patience and ability to just kind of let it be. A tip to know if your seeds are ready to harvest is think about when you planted that seed. For example, if you planted dill seeds, what did that seed look like when you planted it? And do the seeds that are now on that plant drying, do they look like that dill seed? So that's one way to do it. The stalk should be quite dry, quite brown. Those are usually good signs. But again, just think, does this look like the seed I planted? And that kind of goes across the board for all types of seeds, even beans. Does this bean look as mature as the one I planted, or does it look pretty green and young? That kind of thing. So I just sort of divided this up in types of ways that they appear, the way these seeds appear. So umbels, you might have heard of. It's kind of like an inverted umbrella. So if you think about how dill seeds look when they're on the plant, and then parsley, carrot, parsnip, celery, lovage, cilantro, and garlic chives, they all have this kind of upside down umbrella with the little seeds on the ends, which are first, of course, flowers, and then they mature into seeds. So these umbels, again, they all kind of look similar, especially the dill, parsley, carrot, parsnip, celery, and lovage. So again, when you're drying these indoors, after you snip them, make sure you label them, even the little sticky note underneath them as they're continuing to dry before you bag them up and save them, because parsley seeds look an awful lot like dill seeds, and then you might be surprised next season. With cilantro, you may know, it will turn into these sort of little brown balls on the end. So you'll get, they start as a white flower and then they become these balls. And those balls are also edible. You can have those in your spice cabinet as well. But you'll know they're ready when they're very light and very beige. So when they're still green, and if you were to pick them, then they just would be too immature and not viable for growing again. Garlic chives, again, a really pretty plant, I think. And bumblebees love the flowers. They have these, again, umbels that pop up with little white flowers on the ends. And each of those little flowers eventually becomes a little pod with a very black seed inside. So if that seed is still very green, it's not ready. When it's jet black, even a little bit shiny, it is ready to be harvested. So those right now are, in my garden, are still half flowering, half going to seed. And I'll know they're ready when they're dry on that living plant. So again, let it be. So bolters are another type of plant on a living plant. So with those, when it's bolting, it's when a plant sends a stalk up with flowers produced, usually on the end of it or along the stalk of it. And you'll see that with lettuce, spinach, Swiss chard, beets, and basil. So this picture is of lettuce seed, and the little fluffy ones on the end there, as you can see, they've got these little fluffs that are by nature's way of letting them fly around and reproduce. So that's what those little fluffs are for. And it's also a sign that those seeds are dry inside. And you can see the pod at the bottom is kind of brownish, and the ones up top are just starting to form those little tufts, but not yet. And you can see that the pod is still quite green. So if you were to pinch the fluffy one, you'd see nice dry seeds inside. Again, think back to what those lettuce seeds look like when you grew them in the first place. If you were to do the ones up top, they're probably still immature and green in there and won't be as viable. So that's a trick to think about. And each of those little pods will have at least, I'd say, 20 seeds inside. So one lettuce plant, if you imagine all these little pods up top, each one containing at least 20, you can get hundreds of seeds just from one lettuce plant, which is pretty cool. Swiss chard and beets are biennial, which means they produce their seeds in their second season. And I'll be talking a little more about how to do that, how to keep them in your garden for next year and overwinter them. Their seeds, so like spinach, they grow in clusters along that stalk, and you can separate those clusters into individual seeds. You might recall they're kind of knobby, sort of very hard little seeds along the stalk. Now, spinach, they are not biennial. They'll produce seeds in the current year, so they're annuals. But you need multiple spinach plants because you need male plants and female plants for them to pollinate and create seeds. So some of those plants, the male plants, will have pollen on them, and the female plants will get that pollen on them, usually through wind, so that's open pollinated, or insects, or you can help them along by shaking some of that pollen onto the female plant, and those seeds will appear on her. So if you are planning to save spinach seeds, you need more than one plant, as opposed to some of these others like the lettuce. So that's something to think about. Basil seeds, again, will bolt, and you'll get delicate little flowers all along that stalk, and each of those little sort of pods will eventually kind of turn papery and brown. And when you open each of those, you'll know they're ready when they're very black. So basil seeds are tiny, so smaller than the garlic chive, very tiny, shiny black seeds. That's when you know they're ready. But again, you'll know they're ready by usually the exterior of that dry plant, but still in the ground. So it's still alive, but you've got that dry pod on the living plant. So those are some things that bolt. And another living plant that you'll want the seeds to dry on by leaving them are pods. So mostly you've got your pole and bush beans and peas, like this picture. So you've got these beans hanging there. It's hard to believe those plants are still alive, but they are maturing those beans in those pods, and you want to wait until they are all dry and crispy. The green ones that are sort of mixed in there, you'll want to wait longer. And you'll know that they're getting close to that when they start to puff up. So your peas and your beans, they'll puff up. You imagine those beans inside are getting larger and more mature, and again, looking like what you originally planted. So you'll want to wait for that to happen. Now, pole beans tend to take longer to grow. They have a longer growing season than the bush beans. Now, if you find that frost is around the corner, especially a hard frost, which will hurt the green leaves on your vining plant, you can remove the entire plant and let those plant continue to dry indoors, like in a garage or a shed. And those pods will hopefully mature, taking all that remaining energy from the vine and put them into those pods, and hopefully give you some mature beans either to use in soups. Of course, you can use your dry beans to eat, and also seed save. So right now my pole beans are sort of in between. I've got some that are, dry and crispy, and I've already opened them up, and they're perfect for seed saving or eating, like I said, as a soup bean. But there are lots of green, and we're still a few weeks from frost, but I anticipate I'll probably be hanging the plant towards the end if I want to get as many of those dry beans as I can. So that's one little tip. And brassicas, so a lot of these different brassicas, you got kale, broccoli, radish, arugula, bok choy, and a lot of mustard greens. They will also produce pods, very skinny, little delicate pods. Radish, they're a little tougher, but the kales and the broccolis and the mustard greens have a very delicate, very skinny, usually little pods. And they can contain many tiny seeds. So one tip for you is if you are harvesting these seeds from the living plant again, those pods do open and break quite easily, which will self-seed as well. And then you'll have, some arugula and mustard greens popping up in the spring, which is nice. You can have some volunteers. But to save those seeds as much as possible, usually if you put a container or a paper bag over the pods as you're snipping them, so like snip the whole sort of branch of pods off right into that bag or container. Anything that breaks will break into your container and you'll be able to save them. And they're quite easy to save once they're nice and dry and crispy. You can even step on them and all those pods will break open. Do it in a container so that you can save those seeds. But they're quite easy to collect once you've taken that pod off. But do keep in mind that they do break easily and they will sort of sprinkle in your garden. So saving seeds inside fruiting plants. So these do require more of a process because the seeds need to be extracted out of the fruit and cleaned from the flesh, in some cases, like tomatoes, from all that gel that's around the seed and around the fruit and the inside. Some other examples of fruiting plants are peppers, eggplant, summer and winter squash, and of course, cucumbers. So I'm going to talk about the fermentation process. So this is a method for cleaning pulpy seeds like tomatoes and cucumbers. And it really is a beneficial way to properly clean those types of seeds because it gives you the most healthy, viable seed by doing this. And why does it do that? It separates that gelatinous coating from your seeds. It helps to prevent transmission of harmful pathogens that can sometimes be in that gel that's around the seed. And it removes natural germination inhibitors. So seeds naturally have inhibitors to not make them, sprout when they're inside your tomato. So there are inhibitors there to keep them from germinating. And you want to get that off so that they'll germinate for you next year when you're growing them. And you'll want to choose your ripest, largest, best looking tomatoes. So you never want to save seeds from diseased or unripened tomatoes or cucumbers, for example, because you'll just pass those problems on to the next. And if they're not ripe enough, they just won't germinate for you, most likely. And for cucumbers, a little trick is you want to over ripen them. So leaving them on the living plant until they're yellow or orange and they get very swollen. And that's an indication that the seeds inside are really pulpy and full. You'll notice when you're eating cucumbers that, you're able to eat those seeds. They're quite delicate and very thin usually. If you were to have a more mature fruit, you'll notice that the seeds are a little tougher, and that's because they're more mature and they'll be better for seed saving. So that's one tip. Wait till they're bloated and yellow and orange on your plant. And for your tomatoes, you just want nice, healthy, ripe, red or green tomatoes, whatever, not green, yellow tomatoes or whatever color they are supposed to be at their moment. So probably the best way to explain how to do this is to show you. So this is an excerpt from Saving Tomato Seeds, which is on the Mindful Gardening YouTube channel. It's going to show you how to ferment, clean, and prepare your tomato seeds for storage over winter. And you can also find this video on the Mindful Gardening YouTube channel or on the website mindfulgardening.ca. So we're going to check it out.
Tomato seeds and other seeds that have a gelatinous coating around them, like cucumbers and squash, they do benefit from fermentation. The three main reasons why we ferment is it removes that pulp from around the seed, it kills any harmful pathogens that might be transferred to the seed, and it also removes any germination inhibitors that might be surrounding that seed. So ultimately, you're getting a clean, viable, healthy seed to grow next season. What you'll need for this process is a cutting board, a mason jar, a sharp, clean knife, and something to label your jar with. And of course, you'll need several tomatoes of the same variety to save your seeds from. Now this will give you a more diverse pool of seeds to save from as opposed to just saving from one tomato. Those beautiful seeds inside. amazing that that color goes right through into the inside of that tomato. Now I'm going to squeeze the seeds, the juice, and the pulp into my jar. Now you need that moisture for fermentation to happen. If you don't have enough juice from your tomatoes, you can add some water. And remember, you can eat the meat of these tomatoes. You can roast them, throw them in a salad. I can see that these tomatoes are nice and ripe. They're not green inside. They're juicy. The seeds look very full. So imagine biting into these. They are just so juicy and tasty. Well worth saving. There we go. I'm just going to wipe my hands off. Look at all of that juice. This is perfect. I don't need to add water. Next, I'm going to label my jar. This is a crucial step because I will likely be saving several varieties and all tomato seeds look alike, so you don't want to mix them up. So I'm going to write indigo rose and also today's date, which is August 25th. And I will stick that on the side of my jar. Now I'll put this on the back of my kitchen counter out of direct sunlight and leave it there for about a week to ferment. I have a jar of tomato seeds that have been fermenting for the past week and they're ready to clean. I know that they're completed their fermentation because there's a distinct film on top and a musty scent. Very distinct. They are amethyst cream cherry tomatoes, which are small and sweet, and they have this lovely blush to them. So let me show you how to clean them. I'm going to pour the liquid out carefully. Some of the unviable floating seeds will come out, which is fine. Then I'm going to add water and smoosh it around. And I'm going to keep rinsing it until the water runs clear. So this is looking good. The water's run clear. My viable seeds have sunk to the bottom. No floaters. So now I'm ready to prepare this for drying. I like to use mesh because it allows for quicker drying. So I'm using a strainer here and I'm simply going to pour directly. And I'm just going to get all those seeds out. At this stage, you'll want to be sure that you label your seeds again, because as you start saving different varieties, all of your tomato seeds will look alike. I will be transferring these from the strainer onto a larger screen and leaving them there to dry for at least a couple of weeks. And I'll know they're dry when they easily crumble between my fingertips. Then I'll put them into paper envelopes or paper lunch bags and then store them in a storage bin with a lid on top in my cool, dark basement until next season.
So moving on to saving seeds on biennial plants. So essentially you are overwintering these plants in your garden to produce seeds next year. The main efforts to get these viable seeds are patience, of course, the time that you need to allow for them to grow there, and the space. So you need to dedicate some of that precious garden space to those biennial plants because they will take up residency during your growing season. And if these plants are left outdoors, they must be in ground. Potted plants won't survive the cold of winter. The plant's root system will die in pots. So you'll want to make sure that anything that you're overwintering for seeds is outside in ground. So seed you next year, haha. So the plants that you can grow as biennials include parsley, carrot, parsnip, turnip, beet, Swiss chard, kale, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, celery, and cauliflower. So those are some of our common biennial plants. A good way to protect the roots of these biennials is by applying mulch around the base of them over the winter. So again, straw like you used for your garlic is great. It doesn't break down, and it does provide a lot of good airflow as well, and some good sort of bouncy material, so it's not compressing too much. Or in this case, you can use your fall leaves. So either the full leaves, or if you've mulched them, put a nice dose of them all around the base of that plant to protect that root system, because that's what you need to survive to come back next year and produce new greenery and seeds. And if you can find a spot that is protected, so protected from the wind mostly, that's also a good spot. If you think about, sometimes we get snow thaw and freeze, and then you've got bare ground that is frozen. So that mulch will really help if that does happen, if we have that fluctuating snowfall and freezing of the ground. And also snow does insulate. So if you can have those plants where they will have a nice good, foot or two of snow or more on top of them, they'll be even more insulated. So think about that mulch and having snow on top. You're more likely to have success in those plants coming back next year for you. And essentially you're just looking for that greenery to reappear and grow. And then you know that they've survived. They don't always survive, but you've got greater chance if you've protected them. I like to do parsley in particular. I always have parsley that I can eat growing at the same time as my seeding parsley. It's just a great way to get free seeds, essentially. Just a few sort of general tips for seed harvesting and storage. You want to aim for diversity to ensure a healthier stock of seeds when you're collecting. So you want to collect from more than one fruit or flower on a plant. So for example, you want to collect from 5 of your Roma tomatoes, not just one. That way you have a more diverse genetic pool of seeds. So that's one thing that you'd want to do. I just have a question here from our last slide. For the biennials, do you trim them, allow the tops to green, the green tops to die? Yep, you just leave them. You let nature do its thing, and then come spring, for example, with your parsley plants, you'll find your dead parsley that was up there in the fall, that will be gone, and you'll see some of those new shoots coming in. So you don't want to remove any of that greenery. You want to keep that plant completely as it is in the ground and let it do its thing. So you want that diversity, five or more plants of that variety for a nice genetic, wide genetic pool. And again, you want to choose your best looking, healthiest flower, fruit, or plant. Never collect from diseased plants. And again, if the seeds are immature or the fruit's immature, you're not going to get the most viable mature seed that's going to grow for you. And you'll want, again, if they are on that living plant, you'll want them to be as dry and crispy on that living plant as possible, because they will be the most mature for you. Again, when I talk about the parsley, right now I'm collecting them sort of in stages. Some of them have dried completely. Both the umbel, holding all those little seeds, and the little stem that's attached to the main stem has gone brown. I know those are nice and ready. They're nice and fat too, and brown, and they're ready. But there's also some that are green still. So I just kind of go in stages and do that. But if you're not like me and you just want to do it at the end, just wait till they all dry for you and collect them. But I like to collect them sort of as they dry. And again, for those pulpy fruits with seeds inside, like eggplant, even though that doesn't require the fermentation process the way the pulpy gelatinous ones do, you'll want to make sure that you got your most fully grown, beautiful eggplant before you try saving seeds from it. Again, when you cut into it, and if it appears green, if the seeds appear green, even with your tomatoes, if you see some sort of green in that interior, they're probably not quite mature enough. And probably not your most viable seeds. So once you've harvested your seeds, use paper bags to allow further drying. Like I said, with those tiny kale seeds or arugula seeds that are in their little pods, just keep them in that paper bag. It's breathable. They'll continue drying in there. For other seeds that are bigger, like if you've got pumpkin seeds, for example, you can put them out on a plate, put them on a screen. I have sort of a stack of screens with lots of airflow. Just speeds up that process even more. You can dedicate a table to your seed saving, have several plates put out, paper plates or ceramic plates are fine too, just to really let them dry. You can dry them on newspaper and just label them so you know what's what and what variety they are and that kind of thing. And if you're drying things on sort of branches, so I'm thinking like oregano or even the coriander, sometimes, you want to pull that out and let it, the whole plant sort of dry further on that vine. You can do that. Just hang it upside down in a protected spot, so away from rain. It's okay if they get wind because they'll, dry further. Try to avoid direct sunlight when you're drying anything. Even when you're drying herbs for eating or drying your garlic, you don't want direct sunlight hitting it. It harms it. It doesn't make it as viable. You're almost cooking it. And then once the seeds are completely dry, you can remove those seeds from those pods or those branches and make sure your hands are clean and dry. I like to wash my hands between handling different types of seeds because you never know, you might be passing things on to those different seeds. And of course, if you're saving hot pepper seeds, make sure you wash your hands before you touch anything, especially your eyes. So that's always important to keep clean, dry hands. And make sure they are completely dry before you're storing them. So before you're putting them, preferably in a cool, dark place. I like to put mine in a large container with a lid, so everything is separated in there in paper bags, but it's in my cool, dark basement over the winter. But before they get to that stage, I make sure everything is completely dry, because the last thing you want is things molding and then molding their neighbors, and then you've kind of ruined several different varieties of seeds that way. You'll want to label your seeds throughout the seed saving process. As you saw in the fermentation video, you're going to save 5 or 6 different tomato seeds. They all kind of look alike. So from cleaning them right through to putting them in paper bags, you want to make sure that you're labeling along the way. I have a question here. Should the seeds dry in the dark? No, they can dry. They don't need to dry in the dark. They could just dry in sort of, your ambient light in a room without direct sunlight hitting them. Even your fluorescent lights are fine for them. It's just that direct sunlight that can harm them. But, they don't mind being exposed to light. Just eventually you don't want them, exposed to the elements in your home for too long. So eventually, especially when we start putting our heat on in our homes, I usually like to get my seeds collected before we get to that point, and then they're stored away dark and cool. Cool is a little better. It keeps them sort of fresher, and they have a longer life in a cooler atmosphere than a warmer atmosphere. So that's sort of one way to think about it. Creating a labeling system for your longer term storage is really a cool thing to do. So when you're labeling, you can have your plant, the year you harvested it, because, once you start collecting seeds, you may have older seeds that you'll require more testing and that kind of thing to make sure they're still viable. Where you harvested it. So is it from your home garden? Did a friend give it to you? And any helpful notes. So it's always good to keep notes. Like, for example, a certain bean might have been very prolific. I have these gorgeous purple queen beans this year. I'm still harvesting them now. So that's definitely a note I'll be making, because I am saving some of those seeds. They've just grown really well for me this year. So I will probably have a note that says very prolific, grow again, or something like that. And then you'll place those envelopes. You could place them in a shoebox. You could do them with dividers. So you could have a section for cool vegetables, warm vegetables, herbs, flowers, or you can be really smart about it and do them by family, which is kind of neat. There's different plant families. So you can kind of divide them that way, which is, another way to do it. So that way, once next year rolls around, you are so organized and you have everything together. Now, if you have a lot of seeds like I do, I save them in individual bags inside of a larger Ziploc bag. That way I know, all my carrot seeds are in this bag, all of my, brassicas, sometimes I divide them depending on, what kind of works for me. So different families, some of the long maturing things I might put together, like the tomatoes and the eggplants. That way I can pull it out and kind of see what I have for stock for that year. And of course, finally, share your seeds. Swap them with friends, share them with families, tuck them in a Christmas card. It's so nice to say, this was an heirloom tomato I grew. Here's a nice little gift for you. So, that's always a nice thing to do. And of course, consider donating some to the Innisfil Seed Library. That's how we remain sustainable. And we love to have locally adapted seeds. So seeds you've grown in your garden, we know they're probably going to do really well because they've grown well here already. So it's always a really nice way to share your seeds. I have a comment here. I sort mine in a small shoebox sorter that can hang over a door, all in small envelopes. Very cool. Yeah, I mean, as long as it's a room that doesn't get too warm over the winter, it's, pretty neat thing to do. And yeah, and easy access is always nice to be able to have easy access to your seeds. But cool and dark is always going to give your seeds a longer shelf life. So that's just something to think about. And of course, some people put their seeds in the refrigerator. That's just something I don't personally do. But again, the cooler it is, the longer life it's going to have. Because you imagine all that energy in that tiny little seed has to live long enough to be able to germinate. And they don't last forever. That's, it's always eating away at itself when it's stored. So keep that in mind. So keep saving seeds every year so that you always have a nice supply for that current season coming up. So now I'd be happy to take up any questions. I know we had some that came in, but if anyone has any questions pertaining to seed saving or something you've noticed in your garden lately that you have some questions about, please feel free to ask. And of course, if you just even have comments or something that's really worked well for you that I haven't mentioned, any new ideas, I always love to hear what other people are doing and thinking about right now. Is anyone thinking about winter gardening? or do people like to have that break? Because I know some people do the indoor tower gardens, for example. You can be growing all year long. Who's interested in just extending that season? I mean, there are rewards, of course, because then you've got food, right through the winter months. So we do have. So I want to try winter gardening. Awesome. I'm trying a cold frame in my raised bed. Perfect. Yeah, the raised bed is perfect because it's already a frame structure there. So now all you need is to sort of build up some sides on it and a window. Some people use old windows, or one year I used sort of a corrugated semi-translucent board over it. And you want it on a bit of a slant so that the sun does hit it on a bit of an angle. So yeah, last year I had greens till December 4th. Absolutely. Like, there's nothing better than saying, I picked this salad in December. Yep, just old windows over top. Absolutely. So some folks do want to learn. Yep. I'm trying a potted tomato indoors beside my reptile habitat. Ooh, warm and UV light. Yeah, I mean, you can, if your plant is in a pot, it can be brought indoors. I know some folks that overwinter hot peppers, for example, because they want to have that pepper plant come back next year. So there are ways to sort of prune it and maintain it and not overwater it, but keep it watered just enough. I've never done that. Again, I like that little break over the winter, but that is something to do. And if you have indoor grow lights, you can be growing even greens, microgreens right through winter. There's no stopping you from continuing to do that. We have a question here. I have very sandy soil on one end of my garden bed. What would work well there? Well, sandy soil is always going to be an issue because you're always going to be losing water. And it's really hard to hold nutrient in sandy soil. So my advice would be to build up that soil. And you can do that over time. For this year, you can add some compost, some manure. And when you're raking up your leaves, if you have a mulcher, even better, or you can take your lawnmower and run over the leaves a bunch of times, apply that to that sandy portion and just keep building that soil. And the first year, I'd grow maybe some greens there, things that have a shallow root system to get them growing. And then over time, you can just keep building that sandy soil into a nice, rich, full soil that you can grow all sorts of things with deeper root systems like tomato plants. So that would be my advice. Get that sandy soil. I have sandy soil where I live as well, and I've been building it up over the years, and I have a pretty good healthy base now. So you're suggesting lavender and sandy soil. Okay, that's possible. I mean, some plants, even some native plants, because they do require less water because they are adapted to our environments, can do better in sort of harsher types of soil. So that's something that you can think about is either native plants or like this person has suggested, lavender in your sandy soil. Yeah, I'm always a fan of nice, healthy, organic soil, getting that, nice, rich base. I think a lot of areas, especially if you're near the water in Innisfil or Barrie, you tend to have that sandier soil and you are losing a lot of moisture. I do notice that in my perennial bed, some parts that weren't as built up struggle a little more. I find plants are a little harder to establish in those sandy areas because they just lose water so easily. And the nutrients just don't hold in that sand. There is a book for folks interested in winter gardening. You may know Nikki Jabbour. She has a pretty active website and social media called Savvy Gardening. She does a year-round gardener book. And so she shows you how to build cold frames. And what I really love about her approach is, using things you may already have at home, especially during the continuing pandemic. It's always nice to be able to not have to go out and buy everything and just use what you've already got at home. So as someone mentioned, an old window, maybe you're doing some renovating, keep those old windows or old plexiglass, old frames that you can, insert. Like I said, I used a sort of semi-translucent corrugated board that allowed sunlight through, and I didn't have to worry about breakage in case something happened over the winter. That worked quite well for me. So yeah, I would check out her book if you're interested. If you're interested in sort of seeing more in depth about identifying how to save different seeds and that sort of thing, if you go to mindfulgardening.ca/seed saving 101, same as the Innisfil Seed Library website. So innisfilseedlibrary.ca/seed saving 101. You'll find different plants divided by family names. So if you're interested to know which plants are in the same family, kind of a neat thing to do. Like, for example, goosefoot, who would have thought that name existed? But that's what beets and Swiss chard are part of. You can find out the similar family names or families, and they tend to have similar formation of seeds, or they might be typically biennial, that kind of thing. So you'll learn a lot there and what to look for. Of course, my videos are on the YouTube channel. So a lot of, instructional videos I have saving tomato seeds, lettuce seeds, planting garlic, and other things that I do in my Innisfil garden. And of course, the Innisfil Seed Library Facebook page has regularly shared links to really excellent resources. A lot of them are that Savvy Gardening, for example, that are applicable to our planting region. There's also a wonderful company in the US, but they are in our sort of zone. We're zone 5A here in Innisfil, and they cover zones 4 to 6. They're called Fruition Seeds. And they are a seed company, but they provide so much educational information. So that's another resource. They're very active on Facebook, Instagram, and of course their website. And lots of free webinars too, which is awesome, like this one. So it's always good to check out what other people are doing and what they're doing in our zones, which is really helpful. Of course, you might find inspiration in more southern gardeners like Epic Gardening. You may have seen him. He's based out of, I believe, San Diego, and lots of interesting ways of growing food. But of course, he's in a much hotter climate than us, but always inspiring just to see maybe how he assembles, his different growing pots and what he plants together and that kind of thing. So it's always good to find inspiration. As I mentioned, the Innisfil Seed Library, we're currently doing a call for seed donations. So if you've grown some seeds or you have leftover commercial seeds that you'd like to donate, we would love that. We're accepting them at the Innisfil Idea Lab and Library, Cookstown and Lakeshore branches until October 31st. To find out more about how to package them up and that kind of thing, if you go to innisfilseedlibrary.ca/donate seeds, you'll find out how to do that. Really appreciate it. Again, it's such a wonderful way to keep our program sustainable and local. So if you can donate, that would be awesome. And finally, thank you. Thank you all for joining us. This is, again, our final webinar of the season. I'd like to thank our awesome partner, Rizzardo Health Wellness Centre, for supporting this 5-part webinar series, Get Out and Grow. Please feel free to email questions at any time. And I just wish you all the best of luck this fall and over winter. Happy fall.